My name is Clara. I'm 37 years old, and for the longest time my life seemed like something from a postcard. Picture a cosy suburban house on a quiet street, flower beds neatly trimmed, my daughter Emma practicing piano after school, my son Lucas outside shooting hoops, and me in the kitchen preparing dinner and humming along to the soft tunes drifting in from the living room. It was that kind of perfect. The kind everyone thinks they want, the type they envy on social media, thinking it's flawless because it photographs so beautifully. I married Ben when I was 26. He was the kind of guy mothers loved immediately. Polite, funny, handsome enough to draw attention, but humble enough not to let it go to his head. My parents adored him. His family took me in as their own. Our wedding photos still hang in the hallway, me glowing in white lace, Ben smiling his broad, easy smile, our future stretching ahead like endless sunshine. We'd met in college and dated for nearly 4 years before he finally asked the question I'd been impatiently waiting for. I worked at an advertising firm, and Ben bounced around a few mediocre jobs until I leveraged my friendship with Stephen, a longtime family friend and successful entrepreneur, to get Ben hired at his thriving tech startup. It was a comfortable, well-paid job with flexible hours, perfect for our growing family and Ben's laid-back attitude. Life clicked into place, and I thought we had it all figured out. Fast forward 11 years, and that sunny image started to blur. Ben and I were happy enough, I suppose, but somewhere along the line, intimacy became less frequent, and silence filled spaces previously occupied by laughter and easy conversation. We began to live parallel lives, sharing routines, but rarely sharing dreams or fears. I told myself it was just marriage, just a normal phase everyone went through. But lately, something felt off, in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. It started small, Ben coming home a little later from work each day, vague about meetings, his phone rarely out of reach. I noticed the subtle change, but I pushed away the nagging worry, refusing to become the paranoid wife I never thought I'd be. But one evening, as I was folding laundry, his phone buzzed on the bed beside me, lighting up briefly. An unfamiliar name appeared, Jessica, alongside a message preview that read, "Can't wait to talk tonight." Something cold tightened in my chest. Ben walked into the room seconds later, hurriedly grabbing his phone and muttering something about work. He avoided my eyes. For the first time, I genuinely felt the sting of suspicion. I wanted desperately to dismiss it, to believe him, but a tiny seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew steadily over the days that followed. I became painfully observant. Every laugh, every hesitation, every excuse he made sharpened my suspicion. Ben started going out with friends he'd never mentioned before, carefully groomed, cologne lingering longer than usual. His phone buzzed often now, but always discreetly muted. He'd smile at the screen when he thought I wasn't watching. Once, when I entered the room suddenly, he quickly closed a messaging app, startled and defensive, rambling nervously about nothing. I couldn't sleep. Nights turned into quiet battles with my thoughts. I felt guilty for doubting him, ashamed that I'd become this insecure woman, peering into shadows, yet something deep inside me refused to let go. One evening, as Ben was out again, supposedly at a work event, I sat in front of the mirror looking at my reflection, questioning everything. I saw my tired eyes, the first hints of age at the corners, and suddenly felt replaced, overlooked, somehow less. Then it hit me. I had to know for sure. Without really thinking, I picked up my phone and downloaded a dating app I'd overheard friends joking about. I created a profile, carefully crafting a fictional persona named Ashley. Ashley was 25, bubbly, flirtatious, a yoga instructor with curves designed precisely to attract Ben's wandering eye. I felt ridiculous, my fingers trembling as I uploaded a fake yet believable photo I found online. The guilt gnawed at me, but I pressed forward, fueled by an anger I'd never experienced before. This wasn't me, not the me I'd known all these years. But perhaps that version of myself had already been lost. 2 days. That's how long it took for Ben's familiar, charming smile to pop up on the screen. My stomach churned as I saw his profile, full of clever half-truths and omissions about his life. Before doubt could creep in, I swiped right. My heart sank even deeper when a notification appeared almost immediately. "It's a match," Ben messaged first. His excitement was palpable, his words bold, direct, flirtatious in ways I hadn't heard from him in years. Ashley was precisely his type, and he didn't hide it. Soon enough, the messages became suggestive, each sentence a betrayal that cut deeper than the last. Ben quickly pushed to meet, proposing a hotel this Friday, the specifics shamelessly direct. With my heart racing and a bitter, determined smile forming on my lips, I typed a reply, agreeing to his invitation. By then, I knew exactly what I had to do, and how I would make sure everyone who mattered would witness Ben's true colours in vivid, undeniable detail. Over the next few days, my life unfolded like a quiet storm, invisible to everyone but me. Each time Ben's phone buzzed, I felt a hollow sickness creeping inside my chest, knowing those messages were from Ashley, the woman who didn't exist, yet held my husband's attention more vividly than I had in years. At the dinner table, I smiled faintly, keeping up appearances for the kids, Emma and Lucas, completely unaware of the silent war unfolding beneath their noses. At night, when the house fell still, I lay awake, haunted by images of Ben eagerly anticipating his secret rendezvous, his excitement a blade twisting into my heart. Ben's behaviour changed noticeably. He became oddly cheerful, humming to himself, eager and energetic, clearly thrilled about his secret date with the enticing stranger he'd found online. Watching him was a surreal experience. Part of me hoped he'd hesitate, back out at the last minute, remember the vows he'd promised years before. But another part, a darker, more determined part, wanted him to push forward, to seal his fate in a way he could never deny. Meanwhile, I carefully set my own plan in motion. This was no longer just about proving a suspicion. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Ben had always been warmly received by my family, especially my parents, who believed he was nearly perfect. His own parents adored him, often praising how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband. I felt obligated to expose the truth, no matter how painful it would be. But most crucially, I intended to reveal his deceit to Stephen, his boss. Stephen was not only a friend, but someone who highly valued integrity, something Ben had clearly discarded. Thursday evening arrived quickly, the night before Ben's planned rendezvous. Over dinner, he announced he'd be away the following evening, inventing a plausible-sounding conference with clients. He couldn't meet my eyes as he spoke, his confidence briefly faltering when I gently asked how long he'd be gone. It was unsettling how easily the lie slipped off his tongue. After dinner, I called my parents, asking if they could come over Friday evening to watch Emma and Lucas for a few hours, inventing a vague excuse about running errands. They agreed easily, their voices warm and unsuspecting, reminding me once more how deeply Ben had woven himself into our lives. Next, I contacted Ben's parents, inviting them to join us on Saturday evening, explaining casually that we hadn't seen them in a while and that Ben had some news to share. They eagerly accepted, unaware of the true reason behind the invitation. Finally, with shaking hands, I dialed Stephen's number. We talked often enough that it wasn't suspicious, but this call was different. I asked if we could meet for coffee Friday afternoon, hinting that it was urgent yet personal. Stephen, always intuitive, agreed without hesitation. Friday arrived, grey and heavy, mirroring my own mood. Ben kissed me goodbye in the morning, casually reminding me of his late meeting before leaving for work. His confidence bordered on arrogance. He was utterly convinced his lies had gone unnoticed. I forced a smile, letting him walk away, knowing that when he returned home, our lives would no longer be the same. Meeting Stephen at a quiet cafe downtown, I took a deep breath and began to carefully unravel my story. Stephen listened silently, his face clouding with a mixture of shock and disappointment. As painful as it was, I showed him the screenshots of Ben's conversations with Ashley, revealing every suggestive detail, including the planned hotel meeting. Stephen sat back, rubbing his temples, clearly troubled. "Clara, I'm so sorry," he finally said, genuine sympathy in his eyes. "Ben had everyone fooled, myself included. This behaviour goes against everything I believe in. I'll handle it discreetly but firmly." I left the cafe with a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. Now all that remained was the final act. That evening, as darkness settled over the city, I drove to the hotel Ben had chosen, parking discreetly nearby. From the window of my car, I watched him arrive, dressed impeccably, a bouquet of flowers clutched in his hand, smiling broadly as he approached the lobby. I felt sick but determined. Gathering my courage, I followed him quietly inside, phone camera ready, pulse hammering in my ears. He waited in the hotel bar, excited and anxious. I texted him as Ashley, claiming I was almost there, telling him to order champagne to celebrate our first night together. I observed from afar as Ben obeyed eagerly, his anticipation painfully obvious. It was time. My heart thundered as I walked toward him, capturing every second on video. Ben looked up, confused, then horrified as recognition flooded his face. His eyes widened in disbelief, the bouquet dropping limply to his side. "Clara?" he stammered, voice trembling. "Surprise," I said, my voice cool yet steady, loud enough for curious eyes in the hotel bar to notice. Ben glanced around nervously, humiliation quickly reddening his face. "Clara, I can explain," he muttered, rising to his feet in panic. But I didn't wait for explanations. I'd already sent the screenshots and live footage to his parents, my parents, and, crucially, to Stephen. Ben's phone buzzed frantically as messages poured in, signalling his carefully curated world collapsing in real time. "I trusted you," I told him calmly, though tears blurred my vision. "But you threw it all away." Leaving Ben speechless and defeated, I turned and walked away, reclaiming control of my dignity, knowing he'd soon face the consequences he deserved. After leaving the hotel, adrenaline gave way to a surreal numbness. My hands shook against the steering wheel as I navigated familiar streets, now foreign to me, blurred by quiet tears. The life I'd carefully built and nurtured had suddenly crumbled, revealing a painful truth I could never unsee. Yet beneath the hurt was a strange, defiant sense of liberation. I had exposed Ben, peeled back his charming facade, and shown everyone the truth I'd been forced to accept alone. When I arrived home, my parents were in the living room, casually watching television, Emma and Lucas already tucked into bed. Mum rose immediately, sensing something off in my expression. She reached for my shoulder, her eyes filled with concern. "Clara, what happened?" she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and calmly explained the evening's events. As the story unfolded, my parents listened with quiet horror and growing sadness. My father's jaw tightened, his anger visible yet restrained, while my mother pressed her hand to her mouth in disbelief. "I never imagined Ben was capable of this," she murmured softly, heartbreak lacing her voice. "He seemed like such a devoted husband and father." I nodded slowly, understanding her shock. Ben had fooled everyone, including me, for years. My parents held me close, promising unwavering support. Despite the pain, their presence gave me strength, reminding me I wasn't alone. By morning, word had spread quickly through our small town. I received cautious, sympathetic texts from mutual friends, carefully worded calls filled with awkward pauses, and whispers from neighbours who'd seen the footage that circulated quietly, yet persistently through social circles. Ben, confronted by his parents and forced into a humiliating confession, retreated to his childhood home, seeking refuge where he found only disappointment and shame. His mother, who'd always adored him blindly, now struggled to reconcile the son she thought she knew with the man he had proven himself to be. His father, a man of integrity, was openly furious, mortified that his son had disgraced their family name. Saturday evening came, and Ben arrived home to face me. His shoulders were slumped, eyes shadowed, stripped of the confident charm that had masked his deceit. I remained calm, watching silently, as he tried to summon excuses, apologies tumbling desperately from his lips. "Clara, please," he begged, softly, voice heavy with regret. "I never meant to hurt you." "You never meant to get caught," I corrected gently, meeting his gaze evenly. "There's a difference." His apologies faded into silence, the truth hitting harder than any argument. Ben looked down, ashamed and defeated. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." "No," I corrected again, quietly but firmly. "You didn't make a mistake, Ben. You made a choice. Every message you sent, every lie you told was a conscious choice. Now you're facing the consequences." The weight of my words settled over him, his eyes filling briefly with tears of genuine regret, but sympathy was no longer something I could offer him. That Monday morning, Stephen called to inform me that he'd fired Ben from the comfortable, lucrative position I'd secured for him years before. Stephen's voice carried genuine regret, yet unwavering resolve. "I can't keep someone at my company who doesn't respect loyalty and honesty," he explained firmly. "I owe you better, Clara." Ben's termination spread quickly, solidifying the humiliation he'd brought upon himself. With his professional reputation in tatters and few local prospects willing to take him in, Ben found himself applying desperately to entry-level positions, eventually landing at a warehouse on the edge of town. The work was grueling, low-paid, and physically demanding, exactly what he deserved. In the weeks that followed, Ben moved into a cramped apartment, humbled by the sharp decline from the life he'd previously taken for granted. I watched from afar, not with vindication, but with quiet resignation, knowing he'd created his own fate. Meanwhile, my children became my focus, their hearts tender but resilient, slowly understanding the harsh reality that had reshaped our family. My life began to find a new rhythm. Friends surrounded me with compassion, my parents offered unwavering support, and Stephen provided comfort and stability through our enduring friendship. While trust wouldn't come easy again, the painful experience gave me clarity, resilience, and a newfound strength I'd forgotten I possessed. In the quiet moments when Emma and Lucas were asleep, I allowed myself to feel every emotion. Grief for what I'd lost, pride for standing strong, and cautious hope for what lay ahead. Ben had betrayed my trust, shattered the illusion of perfection, and ultimately punished himself. But he hadn't broken me. Instead, from beneath the ruins of the marriage I'd believed in for so long, I emerged stronger, wiser, and fiercely protective of the life I was determined to build anew. Weeks gradually became months, and though the emotional storm had quieted, the echoes of Ben's betrayal lingered quietly in corners of my everyday life. Emma and Lucas adjusted bravely, their youthful resilience a constant reminder that life inevitably moved forward, even after heartbreak. Their innocent laughter returned slowly, filling the house again, patching over the silence Ben had left behind. For their sake, I painted on smiles, cooked their favourite meals, and hugged them tighter each night before bed. Ben's presence in our lives dwindled steadily. He visited the kids every other weekend, arriving in his old car, the sleek company vehicle now replaced by a battered sedan. Each time I noticed how the hard labour at the warehouse left him visibly worn. Calloused hands, sunken shoulders, exhaustion etched into his face. He'd aged more in a few months than in the past decade, humbled by reality. I felt no satisfaction watching him struggle, only a quiet acknowledgement that he'd brought himself here. Occasionally, during drop-offs, our eyes met briefly across the driveway, silent apologies mingling with unresolved regrets. He never asked for reconciliation, knowing forgiveness wasn't mine to grant him easily. Trust, once lost, couldn't simply be repaired by regret. Despite this, bitterness began to fade from my heart. Time allowed me perspective, shifting anger into acceptance, hurt into quiet strength. My friends urged me gently toward new beginnings, coffee dates, yoga classes, even cautious dinners with mutual acquaintances who quietly admired the resilience I displayed. Still, I moved forward slowly, protective of my heart, hesitant to reopen myself so soon. One crisp autumn afternoon, Stephen stopped by unexpectedly, bearing a warm smile and coffee from my favourite cafe. As we chatted casually in my sunny kitchen, the conversation drifted naturally toward the recent upheaval in my life. Stephen had been incredibly supportive, a steadfast friend through every painful turn. He watched me quietly, eyes thoughtful as he sipped his coffee. "Clara," he began carefully, setting his cup down. "You deserve happiness more than anyone I know. Ben's actions don't define you or your worth." I smiled faintly, appreciating his words. "I know, Stephen. It's just taking me time. Trusting again feels impossible right now." He nodded slowly, understanding etched deeply into his features. Maybe it's not about finding someone else to trust yet. Maybe it's about trusting yourself again. Trusting your strength and your judgment. His words resonated deeply, striking a chord I'd been reluctant to acknowledge. I'd questioned everything about myself since discovering Ben's betrayal. Stephen was right. I needed to rediscover my own confidence first. With newfound determination, I began to rebuild my life on my terms. I poured energy into my career, taking on exciting projects that revitalized my creativity and ambition. At home, I transformed spaces once shared with Ben, repainting walls, rearranging furniture, reclaiming the home entirely as mine and my children's sanctuary. Friends noticed the change, often remarking how vibrant I seemed, how radiant my confidence had become. Slowly, the wounds Ben had inflicted started to heal into scars of strength rather than reminders of pain. Meanwhile, Ben's new reality became firmly established. The warehouse work was unrelenting and exhausting, his wage barely covering bills, let alone the luxuries he'd once taken for granted. Friends from our old circles distanced themselves politely, uncomfortable with the awkwardness of his betrayal. His social life shrank to almost nothing, leaving him isolated in the consequences of his own choices. Occasionally, through mutual acquaintances, I heard snippets of his struggles: financial strain, sleepless nights, relentless exhaustion. He'd lost weight, appearing visibly older, humbled daily by the harsh realities he'd created. I didn't take pleasure in his pain, but I recognized justice in the way life had ultimately held him accountable. One afternoon, Lucas returned home from a weekend at Ben's, his face thoughtful as he unpacked his overnight bag. Quietly, he approached me in the kitchen, voice hesitant but sincere. "Mum, Dad told me he regrets everything he did. He says you were the best thing that ever happened to him and he messed it up." Lucas paused, studying my face carefully. He seemed really sad. I took a deep breath, heart twisting slightly at Lucas's innocent sincerity. "I believe he regrets it," I answered gently. "But sometimes we only realise how valuable something is after we've already lost it." Lucas nodded slowly, understanding beyond his years reflected in his eyes. He hugged me briefly, whispering softly before returning to his room. "I'm glad we still have you." In that simple moment, I found the validation I'd quietly sought. The family I'd nurtured so carefully still stood strong, supported by love and resilience. Ben's choices had broken trust, but not my ability to rebuild and redefine my future. Days grew brighter, my spirit lifted gradually with each small victory. Emma's glowing report card, Lucas's basketball victories, laughter shared with friends over wine. Life found its rhythm again, slower, yet infinitely richer. I had endured betrayal, public humiliation, and painful self-doubt, emerging stronger, wiser, and fiercely protective of the life and dignity I'd worked tirelessly to reclaim. As autumn faded gently into winter, I stood quietly at my kitchen window, watching the first snowfall settle softly onto the familiar streets of our neighbourhood. My children's laughter echoed upstairs, filling the home with warmth and innocence. In that peaceful moment, I understood clearly what Ben's betrayal had ultimately given me: the chance to rebuild, redefine, and rediscover myself. From pain and heartbreak, I had emerged stronger, secure in the quiet confidence of knowing who I was, what I deserved, and how deeply capable I was of standing tall once again. Months later, standing at my kitchen window as spring sunlight filtered warmly through the glass, I felt peace I hadn't known in years. Emma and Lucas played happily outside, their laughter bright and carefree, healing the last fragments of heartache. Ben still worked long, exhausting hours at the warehouse, humbled by the harsh reality he'd brought upon himself. Occasionally, he expressed regret, though never seeking forgiveness he knew he hadn't earned. Yet my heart held no bitterness. Time and resilience had granted me clarity, strength, and a newfound belief in myself. I'd survived the betrayal, reclaiming dignity and rediscovering happiness on my own terms. In the evenings, after putting the kids to bed, I'd sit quietly, reflecting on the journey I'd taken, from heartbreak to healing, from doubt to self-assurance. I learned forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was choosing myself over anger, strength over resentment. Life moved forward, gentle yet steady. I had my children, loyal friends, and the knowledge that I'd weathered the worst storm and emerged stronger. Ben's mistakes didn't define me. Instead, they taught me the greatest lesson of all: that happiness and strength come from within, rebuilt carefully, patiently, and bravely from the ground up.